Hi, how are you? It's me again, Miss Ladi, and today I have another story for you. The name of this book is The Silly Gooses. I hope you like it. I love it. It is one of my favorite stories, you see. Let's have fun. Chapter 1 The Silly Goose. Once upon a pond, there lived a flock of geese. Most of the geese were proper and serious, but one goose was not. His name was Mr. Goose, and he was very silly. He wore silly hats, he sang silly songs, and he did lots and lots of silly things. "You had better stop being so silly," the other geese warned, "or you will never find a wife." But Mr. Goose kept right on being silly. Soon it came time for all of the geese to get married, but nobody wanted to marry Mr. Goose. "See, we told you," said the other geese. "We told you to stop being so silly." But Mr. Goose kept right on being silly. Chapter 2 Birds of a Feather. One day the geese at the pond were sitting in their nests. Mr. Goose was sitting in his bean-bag chair. They saw a flock of geese flying in the sky. Most of these geese were proper and serious too, but one goose was very silly. "You had better stop being so silly," called the flying geese, "or you will fall out of that balloon." "I will not fall out," said the silly goose in the balloon. "Not until I climb over the side and let go like this." Suddenly, the silly goose fell out of the balloon, and down she went. Splash! When Mr. Goose met the other silly goose, it was love at first sight. "You have the most beautiful eyes," said Mr. Goose. Said the other goose. Chapter 3 The Silly Wedding. The two silly geese decided to get married. Mr. Goose put on a beautiful wedding dress. His bride put on a handsome tuxedo. "My hat fits great," she said. Then they ran to the chapel. "Do, do," asked the church mouse. "Will do," said the silly geese. "Hooray!" said the church mouse. "You're married!" After the wedding, Mr. and Mrs. Goose were very happy. They wanted to have a cake and throw a big party. But they got mixed up and instead they had a party and threw a big cake. Oh my God. Chapter 4 A Silly Family. "Would you like to start a family?" asked Mr. Goose. "No," said Mrs. Goose. "I want to have children instead." "That's a good idea," said Mr. Goose. So Mr. and Mrs. Goose settled into their bright orange bean-bag chair. A few days later, Mrs. Goose laid 2 eggs. "Look," said Mrs. Goose, "triplets!" Mr. Goose was so proud that he swam out to tell all the other geese. "I am going to be a mother!" he shouted. "Oh no!" whispered the other geese. One silly goose was bad enough. 2 silly geese were even worse. Now there will be a whole family of silly geese. "We can't take it," they cried, and they all flew south for the winter. "But it is only June," shouted Mr. Goose. Chapter 5. Silly Babies. The silly gooses sat on their eggs for weeks and weeks. Finally, the big day came. Snap went one egg. Crackle went the other egg. And finally, the 2 eggs popped open. When the 2 silly goose babies opened their eyes, they couldn't see a thing.
"We're blind!"
they cried.
"Oh dear! Oh dear!"
cried Mr. and Mrs. Goose, and they rushed their babies straight to the dentist.
"I don't know much about eyes,"
said the dentist.
"but baby, you should take these shells off their heads. Maybe that will help."
So the silly gooses took the shells off their babies' heads.
"We can see!"
cried the baby gooses.
"Hooray!"
shouted Mr. and Mrs. Goose. Chapter 6. It's a Silly Life. The silly goose family was so happy that they all went out for ice cream sundaes.
"We want more ketchup and mustard and our ice cream,"
said the silly goose babies. Suddenly, Mr. and Mrs. Goose thought of 2 great names for their babies.
"We can call them ketchup and mustard,"
they said. And they did. When they had finished their ice cream, the silly gooses ordered hamburgers for dessert.
"And don't forget the hot fudge,"
said Mr. Goose. Then, when their tummies were full, the silly gooses rowed a boat back to the pond.
"We sure have had a silly day,"
said Ketchup and Mustard.
"Will the rest of our days be silly too?" "I sure hope so,"
said Mr. and Mrs. Goose. And they were. The end. Did you like the story? Oh, I hope so. Well, see you in another book. Bye-bye.